Hey everybody, Mark Masters, Always Bookin Comedy. I got Scott Eason. He's in Snowpocalypse, Alabama right
Yeah.
now. Sounds like it's pretty chilly there. Uh, so
Yeah.
how are
Yeah.
things, Scott?
Good. Yeah, it's nice to be out and about. We basically had 7 days where all of northern Alabama was just completely shut down. I was in I was in Nashville Sunday to feature for Derek Stroup at Zany's in
Oh, he's doing
Nashville.
my show on Thursday.
Yeah,
What a small world.
yeah, exactly. You know Derek, and I love
Yeah,
Derek, and
he's the
he was in
best.
Huntsville for the weekend at Stand Up Live, and I hung out with him all weekend, did some guest spots on the show, so I featured for him on Sunday, and
Awesome.
we went to Nashville and got there, and it was like bad weather's coming. We were like, okay, and then we went into Opry Mills Mall about 4 p.m. to waste some time before the show. When we came out at 6, there was already like an inch and a half of snow on the ground. Um,
Wow.
and so we did the show, and then we hustled home and had to drive from Nashville to Huntsville at about 40 miles an hour. Uh, got home and then woke up Monday to 3 inches of ice here in Huntsville, and then the temperatures remained below freezing. I mean, for us, which is very rare, it got to close to zero. Uh,
Wow.
so I didn't leave the house for like a week.
Crazy. Pandemic all over again.
Right, and that's exactly what it felt like, and then finally got back to it on. I had to cancel shows all week, and then finally on Saturday had a show with my band, and it was my first time out of the house, and that was very nice. So back to a little bit of normalcy, hopefully here in Northern Alabama.
Nice. That's crazy. What a wild time.
Yeah,
All right. So Scott's
yeah,
based in Huntsville, Alabama. I don't know a
yes.
ton about you. We did a show together, and I know
Hmm.
you run what I think is the longest running show in Huntsville, which any comedy market, like the longest running something is quite a milestone. It's pretty impressive. So why don't we start with
Yeah.
that? Tell us how that started and how old it is. And
So Epic Comedy Hour is my longest running show, and it's the longest running show in the state of Alabama.
wow.
And it's, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's the second longest running show in the Southeast,
Wow.
behind Star Bar in Atlanta. And
Okay.
Star Bar in Atlanta is in the neighborhood of about 18 to 19 years old, I believe. And we are 12 and a half. We've been doing our show
Wow.
for 12 and a half years. So our first show was in July of 2011. The the show was created by a great friend of mine, Justin Ledlow, way back in 2011. There really wasn't any comedy happening in Huntsville whatsoever. We didn't have open mics, we didn't have a club, we didn't have anything. And Justin was an improviser, and wanted to do stand up, and it's one of those things. If you don't have the circus, you make the circus. So he had the idea of like, let's do a comedy show at this great venue in town called the Low Mill. It's actually the largest independently run art center in the United States. Weirdly enough, is in Huntsville. And he launched the show in July 2011, and the first one had 270 people attend.
Whoa.
So it was like, wow, there's like a market for this in Huntsville. And I came on
Who do you have any idea where they got the comics from since there was no comedy?
well, basically, it was all either improvisers or people who are like, yeah, I want to do comedy. So
Okay.
I will say the first show, I wouldn't necessarily say the quality was
Sure.
excellent,
Were you
but
there
the
for it?
I was at the first
Okay.
show, and then I had met Justin around that time, and I performed on the second show, and then kind of hung around, and I performed on most of the shows for the first year, and then I came in as a co-producer around the first anniversary in 2012, along with another great comic, Tim Kelly, and Justin stayed on until 2017 when he moved to Marietta, Georgia, right around that time, and then I've been the executive producer since 17. So I've been with the show basically as a producer since the end of year one, and as a performer since the second show.
So I
And
got a
we've been
bunch of
going for
questions.
12 and a half years. Yeah.
That's wild. That is really
Yeah.
cool. Almost a teenager. Does
Yeah.
uh does the show have a bank account? Like is it its own entity?
Well, it's grown. So at first, for a long time, it was just its own thing, and the way we've always we've just done a door split. So we work with the venue. The venue, of course, if we have to take care of the venue. You know, they
Yeah.
need to they get their their pound of flesh.
Yeah.
And then literally everything after that, we take a little bit to help with advertising and whatever else we may need. Then the rest goes straight to the comics pockets as that even
Oh, okay.
split for everybody that performs. Because from the inception to now, really, your standard Epic Comedy Hour show is there is no headliner. And we don't care who it is. If you got TV credits or anything, everybody does the same amount of time because it's a true showcase.
Okay.
So everybody gets an even split of the door. And we don't have a bank account because we've never really banked any money, because the show either goes into the comics pockets or directly immediately back into the show in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
So it's been a self-sustaining entity this entire time. But
Incredible.
over the past few years, starting in 2018, we expanded, and now it's basically more from Epic Comedy Hour into Epic Comedy Hour Presents, where we actually run currently like 5 or 6 shows here in Huntsville, all under that umbrella. So it's gone from a single show to more of a production company that puts on several different shows here in the Tennessee Valley, and they're all, you know, we're silly, so it's like Awesome Comedy Hour, incredible comedy hour, fantastic comedy hour. We love superlatives.
Nice.
So it's
Nice.
kind of it's grown from one single thing into a hydra. You know what I mean? Multifaceted. So
That's awesome. So are you still in the same venue?
we have been in the same venue with Epic, the original, since inception. So yeah, for
That,
12 and a half years, we've been in the same theater.
that's amazing.
We've
Uh,
actually outlasted. We're on our third owner of the theater. We've been there the whole time, but the ownership has changed hand 3 times.
Wild.
Yeah.
Wild. And do they provide all the equipment for this show, like a stage and lights
They
and sound?
so they do. The first 2 owners that we worked with there were they basically rented it out as a multi-purpose venue, and they did have a soundboard and like basic setups and things like that, but nothing incredibly fancy. But the latest owner is actually Theater Huntsville, which is one of the basically the largest theater group here in town that actually puts on very large scale productions. But they wanted like a side room, like a testing theater. So they've actually, once they procured it, they went in, they tore it up, they fixed it, made it look great, and then they put in state of the art lighting and sound. So they actually provide the everything. We're very fortunate in the fact that we just basically show up, bring the comics, set up the cameras, but they take care of sound, seating, lighting, the whole 9 yards. So we have a very symbiotic relationship with them.
That's wild. How do you do on attendance these days?
So I would say now it's kind of funny in those 12 and a half years, when for the first 6 years, we sold out every show we ever did. We had 6 consecutive years of sellouts as a monthly show. We
Yeah.
sold out every show for 72 months, basically. And then it started to level out. And I'd probably say for up until the pandemic, we were averaging, I'd probably say 125 to 150 people a show, right around there. And then the pandemic, like a lot of things, kind of hurt.
Yeah.
We actually went online during the pandemic, like a lot of shows did. We were actually produced by Hold the Phone out of the Colorado area, if you
Sure.
remember those guys.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they were putting on a lot of shows back then. We did some online shows with them. It was a ton of fun. Once we got back into the brick and mortar after the pandemic, I mean, it took a hit. I'd probably say now anywhere from 60 to 80 people, I'd probably
Okay.
say, which honestly, it's like, you realize in comedy, beggars can't be choosers. Like 60 to 80 people is a great crowd, but we were
Yeah.
very spoiled in the fact that we used to get 250 religiously.
Right.
But living in a town like Huntsville that's just growing literally at an exponential rate, now you're in it. We used to be the best game in town on a Friday night, period, and now
Right.
there's a lot of options. So
Yeah.
we're fighting a much harder battle than we once did. So we consider ourselves very fortunate that we have loyal fans that are still coming out and supporting the show. It's gotten a little smaller, but everyone who's done the show will attest. Like, we have fantastic crowds that are really with it, and they love the show and they support really hard. So yeah, it's still pretty good.
That's awesome. What do you charge for a ticket these days?
It's $10.
Okay.
So we've had two price increases, I should say, since inception. We started off with $5 tickets for the first couple of years, then realized like that's not enough. We went to 8,
Okay.
and then finally a couple years ago we went to 10. as
Okay.
just a nice round number.
Yeah.
And I remember when we went from 8 to 10, we were thinking like, oh man, people are going to revolt over like $2. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. So we've actually discussed, we're talking about going up because honestly, in this day and age, it's like, I mean, if you're a comedy producer out there, I mean, you're charging $10 when, I mean, sometimes you look at the lineup and you're like, this lineup is like a club
30.
lineup. You could get 30 or $40 for this,
Yeah.
but people don't think that way. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like
Yeah.
we have to do it incrementally so as to not give them sticker shock. So
Right.
we actually just did a survey. We have a pretty good following, especially on Facebook. We have a ton of followers, and we put out a survey where we asked, "How would you feel about a price increase? Like, what do you think the show's worth?" And we're actually tallying the information now. So I'm very curious to see what people think the show is worth.
That's nice. It's very
Yeah,
community oriented. I like that. That's cool.
yeah.
So how do you market each month's shows? Sounds like Facebook is a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, we are. It's basically all social media and word of mouth.
Okay.
During those early days in 2011, when people, if you would have said Facebook advertise, people would be like, "What?" It's you post about it online. I mean, there was that definitely helped back then, but it wasn't with like it is now. So back then, it was a ton of street teaming, putting posters up all over town, telling everybody face to face. Because I mean, I think we all know the best advertising is still word of mouth. You'll never beat that. But now it's mostly social media, and we actually had a meeting recently. We're trying to diversify, get a little bit better at socials and things like that, because that's just the way of the world. But we're also going to go back with a more lo-fi approach, and we're going to start street teaming more, like actually, because we do a big anniversary celebration every year where we basically have a mini festival. We do 3 days of shows. We bring in performers from all over the country and theme shows and headliners and all kinds of great stuff. And for that, we actually street team pretty hard, and we notice a real big uptick that actually still works. So we want to implement more of that. So we're actually, honestly, if anybody's got any great ideas, let me know.
Yeah.
Because
Hard to
I'm
street
always
team
open to
during
good
a
ideas.
snowpocalypse, of course.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you need ice skates right now.
Exactly.
It's
Oh yeah.
crazy.
That's not even going to work.
Yeah, I don't know. I think word of mouth is such a good one. Like previous
It is.
attendees and just making people happy at each
Yeah.
show so they come back to the next show. That's a pretty big one.
I think
The
quality kind of speaks for itself. That's what it is if you're putting on a good comedy show, when people leave, if they're happy,
Yeah,
they're gonna tell other people,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say there's a couple things I've observed recently. Like social media ads can be helpful, usually
Mhm.
like 24 to 48 hours before the show. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Like a week before is just lighting money on fire. It seems like
Uh,
people don't plan
I've
ahead.
Yeah, I found that out because we used to do like, okay, well, let's run an ad for a month. And
Yeah.
then I started to run an ad for 4 days and noticed way more coverage
Yeah.
in 4 days than I did over a month.
The other thing that I don't know if this helps, but when you use video clips in those Facebook, Instagram ads, the cost
Hmm.
per click is a lot smaller. So you
Yeah.
reach more people. I don't know if that
Hmm.
actually turns into more ticket sales, but you definitely
Sure.
have you get more bang for your buck.
Yeah, actually, it's funny you say that because that's actually what we're starting now is we're starting to implement like a more of a video centric ad kind of campaign where we do like a weekly roundup, talk about all the shows,
Oh,
individual
cool.
video advertisements, things like that. So yeah, we're throwing spaghetti at the wall
Nice.
to
Nice.
see what works. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, like Huntsville, I would say is a big place. Like I run a lot
Hmm.
of shows in very small towns, like with a, 15, 20 store downtown. And
Yeah.
in those places, posters are incredible with QR
Yeah.
codes.
Hmm.
Because your audience over the course of a month, they walk by your poster. Every
Yeah.
single person will walk by your poster. Put up
Yeah.
5 or 10 posters, and it's, you've saturated
Hmm.
the eyeballs, and people will know about your event. But I think in
Yeah.
like Denver, which I would compare to Huntsville, Denver's obviously I think larger, but
Yeah. Denver's bigger.
they're both big. The posters, who cares? There's so much going on, like
It's
you said earlier.
yeah, it's hard here. That's one of the reasons why we don't do a lot of poster coverage anymore. But we need to hit some hot spots with them. We've realized because Huntsville geographically is it's pretty big, but the problem is it's not concentrated.
Yeah.
So there's only a couple areas where you have concentrated traffic where people are actually out doing things. That's I think sometimes when you have smaller communities like in those downtown areas, that's like the jumping place. That's where people are.
Right.
That's where the restaurants are. That's where the bars are. That's where because it's right there. People can park and then be like, let's walk around, and Huntsville's not really like that because it's so spread out. There's only a couple areas, so we have to concentrate in just these areas. But the thing is, those areas aren't really where our shows are. They're telling you to go somewhere else. So I wish we had a little bit more synergy when it comes to that, but it is what it is. So
Right.
we kind of have to learn to deal with it.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's great. Okay, so you ran the show for a long time.
Hmm.
Do you
Yeah,
run other shows where like more like pop-up shows where the theater doesn't handle all the equipment?
we do. We have a few shows under that Epic umbrella that we do where we actually set everything up. We have the equipment, or I say we, it's more I have the equipment. It's being a comic for so long, you find yourself that you've accumulated a lot of things
Yeah. Well,
over
I
the
do want to
years.
I do want to say thank you and shout you out. When I ran
Yeah.
a show in Huntsville that Scott and I did together, I had an XLR cable that was about this long, which was
Yeah.
a mistake. And
Yeah.
I was 1,000 miles from home, and Scott just ran out to his car and poof had a nice
Well,
long XLR cable. So thank
that's
you.
that's that's kind of a comic for you. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like I think I have that in my trunk. It's yeah. So
Let me check my wallet real quick.
yeah, yeah. I mean, from like a mixer to multiple PA speakers to mics to cords, it's like you just kind of find yourself with these things. And so now, whenever I have an opportunity, if there's going to be a show where they don't have anything, I can provide those things.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
a lot of the times, that's one of the reasons why sometimes comedy is easy to get into venues is because it's extremely low impact. It's not like music where you got load in, load out, sound check. I mean, a lot of times you're like, I got a stand, a speaker, an XLR cable, and a mic. You got chairs, we got a show, baby.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Hmm.
So there are some, but I think I'm fortunate in some of the larger venues that I've worked with. They do have kind of all those things in place, and some of them are like very impressive, like state of the art system. So it's like that's like you're a kid in a toy shop. You're like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
It's like we kind of have everything. It sounds wonderful, looks wonderful. But yeah, if you gotta throw one together in a pinch, yeah, we have all that. So I do pop up shows in that every once in a while. I'll have a headliner hit me up and be like, hey, I want to come through. It's one night only on a Wednesday, and I need this, and it's not when I have a normally scheduled show. So I'll have venues and places that I'll talk to that will be able to throw together a pop up show for that particular headliner. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I think you understand. It's like you just kind of sometimes go where the wind takes you, and it's like if I
Right.
got to do a show here, I'll do it. And it's like,
Yep.
but
It's
it is
good
that
to have,
yeah,
this is something I'm learning is it's good to have good relationships with your venues
very
because
much so.
once you get to know enough people, people will reach out. Like the
Hmm.
thing that's happening to me recently, Denver is about 4 hours driving from Aspen, Colorado. And I keep getting these relatively famous comedians who have
Hmm.
gigs in Aspen. They fly into Denver, they're driving to Aspen, and they're looking at the plane tickets, and the plane tickets are too expensive to do it like a two-nighter. So they're going to
Yeah.
stay like a third or fourth night, and they're reaching out and saying, "Hey, can you spin me up a show?" And
Hmm.
these are people I can't afford normally.
Yeah.
Then I just start calling venues, and I'm like, "Look, I got this person from TV and everything. They're doing a corporate in Aspen. We can get them this Sunday or Thursday. Can we do a show?" And the venues that trust me and like me, they're like, "All right, we'll take a chance. Let's do it." So,
Yeah.
uh,
I get we actually we get a good bit of that too because Huntsville is very kind of centrally located in the South, and we are 4 hours or less from a lot of major cities like Nashville, Atlanta, Chattanooga, Memphis, things like that. So I get a lot of, hey, I don't have anything on a Monday or a Tuesday because I'm in Nashville for the weekend. Can you come through here? And I try to accommodate as much as possible, but it's one of those things. Sometimes it's hard,
yeah.
to like because
I
as a
mean, you don't want to do. It's better to do no show than a crappy
yeah,
show.
exactly. Because as a working comic, it's like, look, if you come here, I want to be able to pay you decently.
Yeah.
And if I can't get a venue to pay you just as a budget, if we're going to try to sell tickets, I mean, it's no offense to you, but if you can't sell a ton of tickets,
Yeah.
you're not, I don't know where the money's going to come from. And
Right.
then the last thing I want is for you to come here and be like, well, that kind of sucked. I barely made any money. And it's like, I get it, but I tried.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
it's like,
Exactly.
and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but it's also like sometimes it's like, man, are you a draw? Do you
Yeah.
have a fan base here?
Almost nobody ever
Are
draw.
you
It's
are
so
you
hard
pull
for comics to
yeah,
draw.
are you pulling people? And it's like, and there are people who I think are fantastic that are, I would say, upper echelon, top tier comics that they just don't have the juice, like the draw to
Yeah.
pull people in on a Tuesday night in a town that's like, I mean, you might be really funny, but I don't know who you are. And it's like a lot of these towns, Huntsville is kind of guilty of it. It's getting better, but they're name and TV credit whores. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you all of a sudden go, oh, this guy's been on Netflix, they're like, oh.
Yeah.
But if anything, if you're like, oh no, this guy's done this and this and this, they're like, I haven't heard of any of that. That doesn't
Yeah.
interest me.
Well, that's a whole different
Yeah,
thing that you get into that I'm sure you have. People trust you, Scott Eason.
yeah,
They have no idea who the comics are going to be, but they're
yeah.
going to go to an epic comedy event because they trust the brand and they have a
Yes.
history with you. And
Oh well, that's so important, and
yeah,
it's important to me as a touring comic myself. It's like sometimes when I'm like, "Hey, I wanna go to whatever city it is," and if I hit somebody up and say, "Hey, I wanna come there," if they're like, "Yeah, yeah, I can do a show for you," I'm always like, "Okay, are you putting together a show for me, or is it a show that exists that
right.
people already come to that I'm gonna be on?" And because that really makes a huge difference. Because if
It
they're like, "No,
does.
no, no, it's a great show, happens every month, people love it," I'm like, "Cool." If they're
Yeah,
like, "I'm putting together a show just for you, it's at a bar I really have never done a show at before,
right.
don't know how it's gonna go," I'm like, "Oh my god." It's like because I am cognizant enough to know, like, I might be, I mean, I'm funny, but they don't know who I am.
Yeah,
You know what I
you're
mean? So
not.
it's like the people that do come to the show, I'm going to give them everything I got and they'll have a great show, but I'm not going to pull butts into the door. So those opportunities scare me more than somebody saying, "This is established. We would love for you to come be a part of this thing."
Right.
So as I see both sides of it as a performer and a producer. So
Yeah.
I would much rather be like, come to my show that people know about, as
Right.
opposed to
Exactly.
me trying to put something squarely on my shoulders or your shoulders,
Yeah.
because there's only so much I can do and there's only so much you can do. So it's like, and I think more and more comics are very like aware of that. So it doesn't happen as much as it used to. It used to be just flooded of like, set me up a one-off show. And I'm like, this is
Right.
hard. This is really
Yeah.
hard. So it doesn't happen nearly as much as it once did, which is good.
Got it. Let's switch gears a little bit. Without giving away what happened at the end, let's talk about this fella,
Hmm.
Derek Stroup.
Yeah.
Super funny guy. Last November did
Hmm.
something nice. But let's go all the way back. Like, how did you first meet Derek Stroup? So, for context, Derek Stroup's been in Denver for a while now. When I
Yeah.
started, Derek Stroup,
Hmm.
somebody I looked up to, has
Yeah.
done great things in Denver, but he started in Huntsville, Alabama. And you take it away
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
beginning.
So Derek is from Harvest, Alabama, okay, which is small and right outside Huntsville. And I met Derek when he was I'm very, very young in comedy. Derek had a very interesting trajectory. The first time I met Derek was at an open mic at a now defunct bar, one of those things like I couldn't even tell you where it was, but Derek came one night and like he was immediately very funny. I mean, he was not who he is now, but you could tell like he already had that crazy energy that Derek possesses. And if you've never seen Derek Stroop perform, I can't explain it properly. You need to experience it. But I met him then, and like it was like one of his first open mics, but he'd been doing comedy, and I was like, I don't know, what does that mean? I don't know, what are you talking about? Like this is like one of your first mics, but just do comedy. And so and I again, I might get some of the finer points a little fuzzy, but Derek was basically the manager of a bar, and he started to do a comedy show where basically he just put himself up. And he was doing like 30-45 minute sets of just being Derek. And this is like, again, he wasn't open micing, he was, you know what I mean, it was like
Yeah.
he took a very non-traditional kind of like pathway into it. And once I met him, he was like, I realized like, I kind of need to get on the right path, like, like regular comedy style. But he had already been like doing really well with what he was doing. So he took a very unconventional method into it. Um, He told me shortly after I met him, we hung out a few times, and I did actually some of his shows in the Anniston area. He ran a show at this place called the Peerless, um, and it was like, I want to say, I can't even remember when it was, but anyway, I did the show, and it's so funny. One of the people on the show that night was Darren Knight, who's Southern Mama.
Okay.
Who, if you don't know who he is, he later blew up on social media and is now a headlining comic. But he was like 6 months into comedy, bombed terribly on this show that Derek put on that I was on, and then literally like less than a month later, he went viral with millions of views, and then he was headlining clubs before Derek and I ever did. It was like such a weird thing, but Derek told me, he was like, I'm thinking about moving to Denver. And I was like, man, honestly, if you can, that sounds great. And I'd been to Denver and knew some comics from there. So I was like, kind of told him, I was like, I think if you go out there, it's going to make you a better comic because you're going to be much more opportunity to get up and perform. And he did. And I mean, he hit the ground running because that really crazy infectious energy that he has. And also like being from the South and coming into Denver with that attitude and that Southern accent and like different viewpoints, he immediately, everybody was like, oh my God, this is like such a breath of fresh air. So he just immediately started killing it. And the next thing you know, I mean, he was just on a trajectory, just straight up. I mean, once he caught on at Comedy Works and started working there, and I think he's one of only two comics to ever skip the Almost Famous list and go directly to pro
Right.
at Comedy Works. Which, if you don't understand what that is, the Comedy Works system is different than most other clubs in the country. It's an interesting thing, and he got fast tracked, and I mean now he had a dry bar special. Jimmy Fallon just I think he just recorded for Don't Tell. I mean, he's on a rocket
I'm
ship right
rocking.
now, and
Yeah.
it's well deserved because again, there's nobody else quite like him in
Yeah.
comedy right now.
Yeah.
He's great, and not to mention one of the most solid human beings I've had the
Such a
fortune of
nice guy.
knowing in
Oh my God.
comedy. Like every time he's coming through, I get a chance to hang out with him, and I've had the good fortune of like he lets me feature for him a lot, which is always a lot of fun. So yeah, it's one of those things. It's seeing somebody in their infancy of their comedy career and then seeing how they are now is really, especially when you like the person, is just such a pleasure
Yeah.
to see that. And so I kind of got to experience that a little bit through Derek, and I've seen it with other comics too. But being a guy that's basically from Huntsville because he's just from this little hamlet right outside the city, it makes it even more special to see another Alabama boy, you know,
Yeah, and it was on late
get
night,
up
like
there.
you said, late night TV with Jimmy Fallon last
Yeah,
November. It was crazy. Got
yeah,
a standing ovation
yeah.
and just killing it. Did you watch that live on TV?
I did actually. Yeah, I was like, because I got to see it. You know,
Yeah,
I was like, I got to see it.
yeah,
It's yeah, it's one of those cool things. Anytime you have a friend, like get something like that, it's just such an exciting thing to watch. It's like it was such a kick here recently because I've known Dusty Slay has been a friend of mine for a very long time as well, and
mhm,
I sat there the day it came out and watched his Netflix special, and it was fantastic. And it's
yeah,
like a guy that I have worked with before, known for years, and having the opportunity to literally see those jokes like on a club stage when he's working them out in their infancy and then seeing them on Netflix is such a wild
it's
like
crazy.
thing. So it was yeah, it's I love the state of Southern comedy right now. I think it's growing. The South was forever a very lost area of the country because people were just like, oh man, ain't nothing down there but rednecks and you know what I mean. And then finally, kind of once the doors open, people are like, oh no, man, the South is great. Like people are very hungry for comedy down there, and they're where the Southern hospitality is a real thing. Like people are very nice down here, and they're very receptive to it. So and we have a ton of great comics here in Alabama and all the surrounding southern states. So it's nice to see a little bit of a light shown on the South that we can be more than, no offense to Jeff Foxworthy and Bill Engvall. You know what I mean? They're great, but we
Yeah,
can be more than just your standard Southern comic because still to this day, especially like out west in certain areas, people are like, "Oh, you're from Alabama, so you must tell like blue collar redneck style jokes." And I'm like, "No, why?
Right.
You just assume that because of where I'm from. That's, I mean, honestly, for woke people, that's stereotyping.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so it's just not there is still that, because of course there's always going to be room for that style of comedy because it was once popular and it will always be, but it's also it's not like that. You know, we have all different kinds of comedy down here, and it's nice for that to be kind of on a national stage.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, we got to land this plane, Scott.
Yeah.
Incredible. Second longest running show in the Southeast, longest running show in Alabama.
Yeah.
Doing it out there, getting out there, telling jokes, ice skating around his driveway. We're not really sure.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
look forward to seeing him.
I will admit I fell. I've fallen a couple times.
Do you have a doorbell camera or something? You got some footage of that?
Oh God, no. And if I did, I would have destroyed it by now. That can never get out to anybody. I went ass over tea kettle a couple times. I don't
That's
want
awesome.
anybody to
So
see
how do
that.
people, if people come through Huntsville, they're building rockets, whatever they're doing, how do they see the Epic Comedy Show?
So you can find us on social media. If you just search for Epic Comedy Hour, you'll find us everywhere. That will show you our main show, Epic Comedy Hour, as well as all the satellite shows that we run. You can also find Huntsville Comedy on Facebook and on Instagram, which will show you kind of a broader look at the Huntsville comedy scene and what's going on, because it's not only us. There are a lot of other great comics there that are putting on shows as well. And you can find me on social media at the Scott Eason. That's THE, my name, which if you're seeing this right now, you can see how it's spelled. And my website is scotteason.com. My dates will be there. And yeah, I'm all over the place. I'm coming up, I'm in Florida, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana. So I'm out and about. So
Awesome.
You can see me somewhere. Yeah.
Awesome. That's Scott Eason, everybody. SCOTTEASON. Thanks a lot for your time, buddy. We're going to wrap this up. We'll be back next Monday with another episode of Always Bookin Comedy. I'm Mark Masters. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Close.